I'm Joanna Simpson here at Risk Minds International in London. Joining me now is Shearin Cao, EMEA Regulatory Engagement Function Director of Regulatory Policy at Citi. Thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And just start by telling me, give me a bit of a regulatory overview for 2024. What are the most important deadlines on your radar?
Thank you. Great question to open a session. 2024 is a very critical year for implementation, especially as the industry and the global regulatory community is evolving what we call the Basel IV package across the line, ideally towards the end of this year, towards sometime next year. So as a result, if the regulations are going live in a big bang manner in 2025, essentially globally systemic banks and locally systemic banks don't have a lot of time to implement such big bang approach. As a result, I think 2024 will be the year that the banking sector and regulatory community come together in ensuring such material regulations will be implemented in time for go live, possibly in 2025. Concurrently, we understand that the Basel Committee is also working on quite a few big packages behind the scene in light of the SVB-CS crisis earlier this year, especially in the context of Pillar 2 framework. So we are expecting to see some development, especially on the interest rate risk in the banking book, as well as a further enhanced approach towards stress testing throughout 2024 as well. So these are the two big areas to watch for next year.
And what are the main challenges you expect to face next year, and which teams will be under the most pressure?
Great question. As we have witnessed in the last decade or so, especially on the back of the lessons learned on the global financial crisis, regulators are not only beefing up the capabilities, supervision, and on the policy competencies around developing regulatory framework in the traditional, we call them the financial risk and non-financial risk framework, but more importantly, they are now looking and assessing from a cross-enterprise, cross-cutting risk perspective to monitor, we call them the emerging risks with a lot of scrutiny and focus. So as a result, naturally, the teams or the functions that are under most scrutiny will be the teams who are looking and monitoring such risk and managing them and developing and adapting risk management framework. So this is often called the enterprise risk management team, which essentially looks at intra and inter risk types across the organization, developing connectivities and holistic frameworks to encompass all of them, and also to help banks monitor and horizon scan forward-looking missing risk or material risk or gap risk in order to adapt to an ever-evolving and highly complex world, so as we speak. So in a world, just to quote the World Economic Forum here, that is filled with karma crisis, enterprise risk management team is definitely under a lot more scrutiny and pressure.
And in the longer term, what industry events will influence the direction regulations take?
This is when I will plug Risk Minds and Quant Minds as a result of that. I mean, no doubt, Risk and Quant Minds are the flagship event for this community, with senior representation, with a lot of thought-provoking discussions and debates throughout the last few decades. More recently, especially if you see the last 8 years, Risk Mind have a designated day just to focus on regulations and reactions to regulatory complexities, preparedness on implementation, as well as influencing and advocating on rule changes within this senior community in a very timely fashion. So for sure, I think this is the right community for everyone to get together, but also to quote something we said earlier in the summit today, which is about, see, in order to have a public and private forum, to have open dialogues, to talk about developing a safer, sounder, more competitive risk management framework on both sides of the coins, it is very important to continue to have the frontier discussions, thinkings, implications, analysis in a very bespoke forum, again, this is the right forum to be taking place and to be having all these conversations.
And many regulations have been introduced over the past 15 years. What's the key to keeping up in this environment?
Yes. As I referenced earlier, in the world of permanent crisis and a lot of geopolitical risks, I think quite often a risk officer will tell you, especially chief officer will tell you, what's keeping them up at night is not only managing the known risk, but importantly, to have a framework to adapt and manage the unknown and unknown risks. So in this time of volatility, of changes, of actually permanent changes, so as we speak, and the ability for the industry as well for institutions to deal with a broad spectrum of topics and challenges is really putting both the community, the ecosystem, but also individual institutions to test. I think what quite often keeps someone like me up at night is, in further to that, there's also a great volume of regulations under consultation, under discussions, and the development recently published, as well as the plans of further types of regulations to be developed in light of the emergent and unknown risks. So therefore, someone like me who looks after regulatory policy will have to think not only from a influenceability of the existing regulations, but more importantly about horizon scanning of upcoming changes, upcoming risk management disciplines and risk types, and how does that look like from a regulatory framework perspective.
Shearin Cao, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.